Hello and welcome back to the Pose Factory. So now that we have Urdhva Hastasana and Tadasana, I'd love to show you how Utkatasana, chair pose, really relates to these. It's basically the two of those with a little bit of exaggeration. If you remember, so we talked about what's called the plumb line. We talked about a relationship to gravity in Tadasana. We had ears, shoulders, mid-ribs, greater trochanter, side of the knee, all over, stacked over the ankle bone. And I said to the power point in Tadasana was the pelvis. And what I told you to do was move your inner thighs back, which create a little bit of rotation, internal rotation of the thighs. And I also said soften the knees basically forward so you don't jam the knee back. If we exaggerate that action, we move our inner thighs way back and allow the knees to go forward as our hips go back, we're already starting our chair position. Now that approach is how we would get into our functional alignment. But let's start with the dogmatic alignment, which tends to be feet together. So place your feet together and spread your toes with your feet together, bend your knees. Now, typically the way I've seen this, like the more dogmatic, again, the word dogmatic referring to the popular way of saying this is the correct way of doing the pose. Doesn't mean it is the correct way, but according to some people it would be. So that would be a tail tucked, knees bent with feet together and arms up to the sky. It looks something like this. Let me step back just a little bit so you can see. Okay, tail tucked, knees like this, and eyes look up. Something of this nature. Okay, so let's do it together. Feet touch, spread and press down. Now bend the knees and draw the tail down as you bend the knees. So you lengthen the low back and then reach the arms up, palms together, look up, head back, look up at your thumbs, soften your eyebrows, elbows straight. Okay, and then release. Now, again, I ask you, have a journal and write down your experience. Take a moment. What was your experience? What did you feel? If you didn't really know, then hold it a little longer. So I'll lead you through it again. If you're jotting down notes, great. Feet together, bend the knees, tuck the tail, draw the tailbone down, reach the arms up. Shoulders to the ears, look up to your thumbs. Now if I hold this position, I know already what I'm starting to feel is my lower quadriceps engaging. Okay, they're really working hard in this position. So I would say the dogmatic approach works the lower quads significantly. Now, some injury awareness. If someone has knee injury, for part of the reason, I think because of the quads are pulling on the kneecap, but there's something about the way that weight is loaded that it tends to be bothersome for a lot of people with knee injury or just chronic knee pain. Now, I'm not giving you necessarily anatomy behind it, and I don't necessarily know except for that it seems to pull a lot of or put a lot of pressure on the knees. So one way that I have developed chair pose so that it's not so cumbersome on the knees is to move the weight back away from the toes and move the weight centered over the heels like our Tadasana. So let's get you into the non-dogmatic, what I would consider more functional alignment. And again, doesn't mean it's correct. I know I'm giving you my opinion that this is a good way of doing it, but the dogmatic approach is also a good way to do it, and I want you to just feel the difference because then you can make better choices for yourself based on what your intent is, right? My intent is to take a little bit of weight off of the quads, and also I like chair pose to be more of the opposite of how I'm sitting in the chair. I want to strengthen my back to be able to sit upright without a seat back, okay? That's kind of part of my goal of chair. So all we do is exaggerate what we did in Tadasana. So we take our inner thigh bones back, power point moves back, and you're gonna feel that it sticks your bum out significantly. And by inner thighs back, you can think about pushing your heels slightly outward, the backs of your legs out, until you feel your outer hip muscles activate. So you sit low, and I usually start this with lifted toes. Toes lifted, inner thighs back, press the heels apart, find your outer buttock muscles. Now, use your back muscles here. You put one hand on your back, lift your chest up until you feel the muscles on either side of your spine engaging, okay? So those are your erector spinae muscles. They're the muscles that keep you erect upright. Keeping the spine upright, now keep pushing your heels out and just gently start to draw the tailbone down. Not a lot, just a little until you feel more buttock muscle engagement. Heart stays lifted, tailbone is slightly tucking, heels are pressing out, toes are lifted for now, and then reach your arms out and up. And more functional would be probably just arms shoulder width apart. Sometimes I really like to put the palms together and get that strength out of the shoulders, but for me, I find that that's kind of extreme and quite difficult, especially in the beginning of a practice. Okay, and then come on up and release. So by moving your hips and weight back, well, first of all, what did you feel? Take a moment, you can write down in your journal and observe, like, what did I feel? What was the difference? Certainly, you'll still feel quadricep engagement, but it transfers the weight more to the buttock muscles, especially with that added cue that I gave you of pushing the heels out. Okay, so the power point here is in the pelvis. The foundation is the feet. What we did to connect the pelvis to the feet were two things. We pressed the heels out, which comes from the outer buttock muscles called the gluteus medius and minimus. So when you push your heels out, you transfer the strength from your hips down into the foundation. And then we started to draw the tailbone down towards the heels as well, getting more gluteus muscles, the deep rotators and gluteus maximus, and hamstrings even participating in this posture, making it a really strong, solid foundation from the power point down into the earth. And that's why I call it a power point. It's because it's a source of power. So from the pelvis into the feet. How do we do that? There are two ways we just did it. We pushed the heels out and we drew the tailbone down. I'm going to give you one more option you could do in your chair that tends to feel really good for a lot of people. So grab a block and place it between your shins or upper thighs. Let me show you the options. Shins here, you squeeze it this way. Upper thighs here, and you squeeze it this way. Okay, so I'm going to say, let's start with upper thighs. And I don't know if you knew what a Pez dispenser is, this little candy. It like disperses Pez, and Pez was like in this shape, and it would go back like this. You're gonna actually take your block, squeeze it between your thighs, and you'll push the block and your skin of your inner thighs back in chair, okay? So let's start with toes lifted. The reason I do toes lifted is to try to help get the weight back into the heels. Once the weight's back there, if you wanna press the big toe, pinky toe down, or all your toes, that's all, all good. So bend the knees, press the inner thighs back by pushing into the block and stick your butt back behind you. Push the heels out, but still squeeze the block. By squeezing the block, you're gonna feel the muscles of your inner thighs called the adductors. Sit low, and now keep squeezing the block and start to tuck your tailbone a little bit. Not so much that you change the shape of your back. Just draw the tail slightly so you feel your buttocks engaged. Lift the chest up, reach the arms up about shoulder width apart with the arms, squeezing the block, and then rise up. Okay, so that's another way to do it. If you wanted to just get pure adductors, I would say squeeze the block between your shins and you'll have a different experience. The block between the thighs going this way is going to be a little more internal rotation, activating the adductors to turn the thighs in. The block between the shins is just going to be pure what's called adduction, squeezing the legs in side to side. That's another way to activate from the power point, the pelvis, down into the feet. So squeeze the block with your shins, sit back, lift the arms up, find that curvature in your spine, but with a little tailbone tuck. Okay, and rise up. So far, everything I've mentioned in chair pose, and especially in Tadasana, is maintaining the lumbar curvature. Chair pose especially exaggerate the lumbar curvature is my personal opinion, because that's going to strengthen the muscles that keep our body upright, okay, the erector spinae group. And this is also going to strengthen our ability that when we sit down, we don't slump like this. It's going to activate the muscles that keep us more erect, upright, keeping the spinal column, the erector spinae group. Okay, so you have two different ways of doing chair with a couple of different activations in the functional alignment. One way to squeeze in, the other way to push out, but either way we were drawing the tailbone down with an arch in the low back. Again, with an arch in the low back is the key in the way that I'm presenting this posture. If you're doing it the more dogmatic way, feet together, tailbone drops, it's typically more of a flat back, okay? The weight is more forward towards the toes. And again, the way that I taught you was toes lifted to help bring the pelvis back. Last thing I'll mention one more time, just because I know this stuff goes by real fast, is that once your hips are back, you could choose to go, keep with foundation number 2, toes lifted, or you can go big toe, pinky toe, or you can go toes down. So inner thighs back. Once you get the inner thighs back, maybe you go big toe, pinky toe, or maybe you go all toes down, or just keep the toes lifted. All different variations, ways in which you can experience this shape. I would love for you to try all 3 with the toes, and also feel how lifting the toes does push or help you push your hips back. All right, I hope this makes sense because it's very clearly the same posture as Tadasana with just a little emphasis or exaggeration on everything you are doing in Tadasana. You're very much keeping the body, that plumb line. If we were to drop down, the ears, shoulders, the hips are a little bit farther back behind the ankles, but more or less you've got generally a straight line up and down. The knees are in front, the knees are a little forward, the hips are a little bit back of that plumb line, and they're counterbalancing each other out. But I'm trying to move back as I push my heels out and lift up, okay? So the same gravitational plumb line exists, just in a really exaggerated position. Thank you so much. Look forward to sharing more postures with you. See you on the next one.